It's a great honor for me, Judith, so thank you
No,
for
it's a
agreeing.
great honor for me. Are you kidding?
So thank you for agreeing. Tell me why Ukraine, because it's a bit strange that a person from New York, suddenly not involved in the military or not involved in big politics, suddenly in the middle of the war arrives to Ukraine. Why Ukraine?
Okay.
Why now?
Well, my dear friend David Reef, he's been coming here for 2 years, I think 2 months after the war began, in April of 2022, he came for the first time, and he was being honored. He was being made an honorary professor at the university, and he was giving a speech. And he's sort of like my brother, and we've known each other for 40 years. And my family supposedly comes from Ukraine. I know they emigrated from Odessa. Were they really from Odessa? It's hard to say. They left in the 1870s. So everybody's dead. But this is the story that came down to me. Odessa and the Crimea and Kyiv. And I was told that the Jews of Kyiv are sort of bird-like Jews, sort of narrow with bony faces. And so I've always had this feeling about it. And I wanted, of course, I followed in an American way. I've followed what's going on here, and I've wanted very, very much to come.
Wasn't it too scary, risky? What were you thinking while coming?
No, I get these constant emails from New York and texts, aren't you scared? Please be careful. This is an absurd thing to say. I'm not scared at all here. I don't know why. I think you make a decision to go somewhere. You can get run over in New York on the corner by a bus. You can get mugged in the park. I wrote about the war in Nicaragua in the 80s. I was there, and it was pretty dangerous, but, and there were also earthquakes, but nothing happened. Something could happen. I'm also old, really old now, and so it's more important to me to live than to be safe.
The major feelings which you have here, and what you expected, I guess, something, and then something happened or didn't happen to you in terms of emotions and feelings.
Yeah.
What it was.
Oh, God. Yeah. Let me see if I can hold this together. So on the train from Poland, from Przemyśl, you get on the long queue, the line with all these people going back to Ukraine, and you wait, and then you get on the train. And so at Lviv, the border guards came on, these beautiful young men with their guns, and they said to me, "Do you have any body armor?" I said, "No." They said, "Well, what kind of drugs do you have?" I said, "I just have old lady drugs." And then they said, "Why are you coming here?" I said, "I'm coming here to teach. I'm going to be speaking at the university." And then he said, "Thank you." And I burst into tears, as I'm about to do now. And I felt that everywhere that I go. I'm doing nothing heroic. I'm in a comfortable hotel. I have 3 meals a day. I'm meeting wonderful, exciting people who are serious, engaging, wonderful people, not only writers and professors, but strangers whom you meet, whom you run into, people in cafes, people on the trains, people in Odessa, students. I gave a lecture at the university. There were 150 students who wanted to hear about writing essays, who wanted to hear about writing biography, who had their ambitions and their dreams. And I was at the first day, the induction ceremony for the freshmen at the university. It was on a Sunday, just before school started. That morning at 5 o'clock, there was this huge bombing. I have slept through all the bombings, I have to say. And I looked around at these beautiful kids. They're 18 years old. A lot of them are wearing Ukrainian embroidered things. And they're so happy to be going to university. They feel so privileged. And you look around and you know that a lot of them are going to die for their country. And I have a son who's 35, who was one of those kids once in a very safe American university. And you think of the devotion, you think of the precarity, the preciousness and the precarity of their situation, and you're just moved beyond speech by it. It's just, there's an incredible, I wrote about this once in a completely different context. There are certain moments in the history of a country which you could call idyllic. Now, you think of an idyll as this beautiful moment of an idyll on the beach, a romantic idyll, an idyll in nature. But an idyll is something else. An idyll is a moment of impossible unity. It's a moment of impossible community. It's precarious, it's fragile, it's very hard to keep. And I think Ukraine is having this now because there's such an extraordinary feeling of togetherness in what you're doing.
You mentioned several times while we were drinking wine and chatting that you feel alive. What it is for you to feel alive? It's a very Odessa thing to say, but...
Yes, well, you know, I think coming from New York and coming from, I spent lots of time in Europe, I'm sort of like a Europeanized American. The concerns in a late capitalist democracy at peace are pretty narcissistic. Everybody's concerned with their career and how this article went, how this book is going, where they are in the pecking order of things. And in a situation where a country is fighting for its identity and its survival, there's no room for narcissism. And what you sort of course, there's frivolity. I mean, we joke around, there's frivolity, there's vanity. You know, people are not suddenly transformed into saints here. But there's a sense of a higher purpose. And I think you know, in New York, you strive to find a higher purpose in your writing, your this and your that. But here it's just all over. The higher purpose is making sure Ukraine survives, wins the war, regains its autonomy. So it's a feeling of being, everything counts. I wake up, you know, most mornings there's a bombing thing. The lady in the hotel comes on, go to the shelter now, and then it's called off. And so you're constantly aware of the price, the life and death price of existence, of how precious it is, of the sacrifices of mostly, but not only, young people who have everything to live for. And my son, who's 35, young people don't think that they're mortal. The people here do. They know they are. So it's a sense of, you know, it's a sense of seriousness. It's a sense of something very important being at stake. And yes, there's something at stake in our election, which is going to happen very soon. But it's the country's not going to be destroyed the next day. And every day here you're aware of how much violence is being perpetrated and how difficult and costly it is to fight back. So it gives life a sense of real preciousness, and it's vicarious in a way. I mean, I don't want to, it's horrible to think of myself as a disaster tourist, and I don't, but it's borderline because I'm going to go home soon, and I'm going to go back to this very safe place, and you're all going to be here, and I want to come back, and I want to sort of stay involved. But yes, there's a sense of urgency.
Odessa. You went to Odessa. I am from Odessa.
Yes.
What are your impressions? Because you just came back this morning.
Yes. I immediately fell in love with Odessa. We got there at the golden hour. It was about 6:30. And this beautiful golden light, beginning of autumn, not quite. These streets of old plane trees, some of which are of disease and they're prematurely brown. And these beautiful low buildings, many of them decrepit. And the cobblestone streets, And I hate to mention a Russian writer, but I do love Chekhov. So this sort of Chekhovian atmosphere about we're just driving through the streets to get to the hotel. And the sea, the Black Sea with its extraordinary history, the opera house, it's a city of striving. It's a city of fantasy. It struck me as a city of all kinds of sort of fantastical ambitions, literary and artistic and cultural ambitions. I just loved it instantly. I just sort of, it's a first impression. It would change, I'm sure, if I lived there. So, or be altered. But no, I felt, and I don't know whether or not my family lived there or whether they just emigrated from Odessa. I just felt a personal connection to it.
You are a writer.
Yes.
Do you remember the day when you finally, I don't know, woke up or started drinking a cup of tea and understood yourself as a writer?
I was very young, and partly my mother wanted me to be a writer. So would I have been something else without her interference? I think it was a combination of her fantasy, which could have been disastrous if she had pushed me to do something, and a talent that I had for writing that luckily for me I was able to make use of. I was very young. I started writing I was around 10, 11, 12, 13. And I wrote always. And in high school, I was the editor of the newspaper. I went to Europe to work as a tutor, as a barmaid, and I wrote poetry. And it was a love of language. Some people dance. Some people are athletes. For me, language was this very, very important place that I just was drawn to. I didn't know what I was going to. I thought, you can't earn a living as a poet, so you have to figure out something that you can sell. So I became, I tried to write a novel. I can't make things up. I'm not good at making things up.
You would be writing a script for a series, what it would be about?
If I would write a script for what?
For a series, for a TV series, what it would be about?
It would be about women. It would be about women's lives. It would be about, I think many of the things that I've written as a biographer and as a journalist have been about making a woman's life real when she wasn't real to herself. So, which was the case of my mother. She wasn't really real to herself. She was, she was sort of like a cupcake or a pressed flower or something. She took a form that was assigned to her. And the women who really interested me as subjects have been women who were assigned an identity, which is the history of relations of women's roles. They're assigned an identity, whether you want to be a mother or not, whether you want to be a virgin or not, so women have had to seize the chance, seize the freedom to be what they felt called to be. So I've always written about that. I've written about men too, and I've written about culture and other things. I would like to, I'm thinking about Ukrainian women at this moment, and women writers, and I've met some young Ukrainian women who are both fighting and making literature, and this is a country that's redefining its identity. So it's not just women, but it's the idea of defining an identity. So probably that's what I would try to do. I'd try to find a great subject, someone who is inventing herself.
When you speak to students, for example, future writers, or we do not know if they will be writers,
right,
but they are probably thinking about it, what's important?
Well, what's important to me is their fantasies and what they want to know. And some of them at the university asked me, their questions were very tactful, but they were really saying, how do you get to be you, meaning me? How do you get to be a writer who's published in an important journal, who's published books? So I'm interested in talking about that process. If you want to write, you have to read all the time. You can't stay on your phone. You need the words on the page. Then you have to find, as you just asked me, what would you write about? And you have to find something, if you want to make a living at it, you have to find something, a little specialty, something that other people don't know as well as you do. And maybe it's writers from another culture. Maybe it's an aspect of nature, maybe. So find something that's your own, that you can sort of know better than other people and write about it. That's one thing. And of course, I talked a little bit at the university about one girl, these were girls, they were 18. She said to me, basically she said, do you ever get triggered by a subject? And it was an interesting question that I wanted to talk about. She meant, did I ever get so upset and afraid that I was stymied? Now, my generation, I'll be 78 in a month. We sort of grew up, there was lots of predation, men exposing themselves and people grabbing you on the subway, and we didn't think of ourselves as victims. That was not part of the vocabulary. And we had to go into this world in which there was a lot of sexual danger and just deal with it. So, and I've traveled by myself in dangerous places as a young person. So I don't get triggered easily, but I'm also kind of a sturdy person. I'm not saying that people don't or they're making it up. I'm not saying that at all. Of course they do. But I was interested by this, and I said to her, no, I don't get upset in the sense of, I don't feel a personal sense of danger. I feel a personal sense of anxiety that's of something that someone is going through that I identify with. I sometimes feel a personal sense of outrage. How can they not see themselves, or how could this be done to them? So it's a moment for young women of negotiating this issue of victimhood and strength, and that's it's a big question.
When you choose about whom to write, if we speak about the biography, how would you choose?
It's mysterious. It's like, how do you choose who you love? Sometimes it's a very bad idea that you don't understand till later. Sometimes it's just this extraordinary feeling that's hard to put into words, that you're called to think about this person, to spend time with them. Sometimes you don't know what you're getting into. And then you have to go on. You know, it's like, I described at the university, I said, sometimes you take on a biography and it's going to be years. And you're like a bride setting out from a village who's been promised to a groom at the other village on the other side of the mountain, and you just have to go and see what the family's going to be like and hope they treat you well.
New Yorker. I mean, you do not easily meet somebody who is writing for ages for New Yorker. So why New Yorker? Why so long? And are you happy with this marriage with New York?
Well, this is a story not many people know. My grandfather, not the Russian side, the Ukrainian, Odessan, the Hungarians. My grandfather was a baker, and he worked for the company that was owned by Fleischmann Yeast. And the son of that company, Ralph Fleischmann, was the publisher of the New Yorker. This was in the 1920s. And Ralph Fleischmann's father wanted his son to learn about bakeries and making dough. So he sent this very privileged boy who went to a fancy college to be an apprentice to my grandfather. And my grandfather was an incredibly tough street Jew. In Hungary, he'd wandered around in Central Europe by himself with his brother, living on frogs. They became friends. So Ralph Fleischmann gave my mother a job at the New Yorker in 1927 or 28 as a receptionist. So this was a magazine that was revered in the family, revered. And these were people who were not particularly cultivated or literate. And my mother was, and she grew up revering it. So I always had in my head the New Yorker. But everybody did, not just me. All young writers, their dream was to be published there. So after I'd written my first biography, which was a big success and won the National Book Award, and I went to the editor of the New Yorker, whom I knew, and I said, I'd like to write for you. He said, great. Oh, okay. So that's how it started. And then I had to write a second book, which took 8 years, so I stopped to do that. And then I went back when David Remnick became the editor in 2000. And it's been a very satisfying, sometimes I think I should be writing books, but sometimes I think the chance to keep writing about different things all the time. It's like getting a PhD in 4 months. You have to learn everything about it and at least project authority about a subject. It's been really challenging and quite delicious also in some ways.
City. New York is your main city, the love of your...
Is New York what?
Your main city, your
yeah,
love...
I was born there, which most New Yorkers can't say that. I was born there. My son was born in the same place I was, hospital that I was. He went to the same school my mother went to in 1914, around the corner from our house. And an Italian friend of mine who's a sort of film person, he had an interview with Martin Scorsese about New York, and they screened all of these images in film of New York. I knew where everything was. I was in tears because I'd never had a sense of place that was so strong before. I thought, I come from somewhere. I come from the city. So it's, I've spent most of my life there. I lived in Europe for 5 years and I've traveled a lot, but I'm from the city. I just, sometimes you can hear it in my accent, sometimes you can't.
The second city after New York for you?
Paris in some ways. I guess I have to say Paris, yes. I lived there. French is in a way, my French is very, very good. I was an interpreter when I was young. It's not perfect. You know I'm not French. But I feel that French speaks me and I become someone else in French, but someone sort of like me, but a little different, cooler. Some of the authors I love most are French writers, the people who, the language, the literature that's been most important to me. And I have a lot of friends there. Yeah, Paris. Suppose I can't say this, but if Trump wins, I've thought, where will I go? And maybe that would be Paris.
You said Paris, and I have this very cliche association, so we'll ask you the following. How your perception of love changed during the last 10 years, for example, if it did change?
Good question. As you get older is one thing, but as you get old, there's a difference. Your life doesn't depend on love the way it once did. So you have more freedom to think about it. You have more freedom from the need for it. You have more freedom from it's interesting. Love. That crazy, mad passion that one feels which you can feel your whole life. You can feel it at my age too. It's not that it goes away. Inside each one of us, all of the waterworks are still there and they still function. But I think age just gives you detachment. They give you a sense of being alone, because you are alone. You're going to die alone. I mean, not necessarily die alone with nobody around you, but you go through life and then it's over, and then it's over for you on your own. So it's both not as frightening, and it's not as overwhelming, not as consuming. And I think friendship acquires a preciousness that it doesn't have when you're younger, when you're concentrated on partners and being loved and being desired. It's not love, it's desire. Love stays the same. Love is super important. Love is the tentpole. But your relationship to desire changes.
Friendship. You arrived to Ukraine in the middle of the war, initially to support your friend. I saw this type of friendship with it. I mean, I saw it in my grandma's family and in my parents' family. I have some of friends like that. So what is friendship for you? And did something change about it or not in the last, 10 years?
I think with the friends of a lifetime, there's a kind of unconditional acceptance that is one of the most precious things that there is. They know who you are. They've seen you as the jerkiest person you can be. They've seen you make mistakes. They've warned you about them. You haven't listened to them. You've seen them in the same way. You've gone through milestones together. You've been sick. They've been there for you. They have been sick. And it acquires a kind of stability. We were talking about stability before, about being in Ukraine and this incredible instability. People crave stability, which is why they make certain bad political decisions, why they make certain bad romantic decisions, but it's also very important. And I think friendship for me is about being seen by somebody and being able to see them, and it's a sense of profound mutuality.
Coming back to literature, and figures of translators, interpreters, how would you actually say translators or interpreters?
Different.
When we speak about the literature.
Translation is usually written and interpreting is usually oral.
So then speaking about translators, a lot of things about foreign literature we perceive through the translators. What is important? I mean, let's say I am a student and you want to explain me what is important about the translators.
You know, translation is, I love to translate because your ego's not involved. Someone else has written something. You're not responsible for it. You are responsible for making it understandable to somebody in your language. And that's an artisanal, a technique, a technical, a craft thing. It's not necessarily art. There's an art to translation. I'm not saying that there isn't. But you're off the hook. Your ego's off the hook. You can, it's the pure pleasure of language. It's like making a mosaic. It's like crafting. It's crafting something. But there's no pure prism. A translator is a prism. The language goes through you and comes out in a different color. So you have to be aware of your prejudices. You have to sort of you have to inhabit both. Forget that. It's like navigating. You want to go from here to here, but you can't go directly because there's a wind. So you have to go here and then you have to go there. You have to triangulate. So a good translator is a good navigator. And it's you have to be a perfectionist because there's so many choices. And you have to, I have a prejudice. I have lots of friends who speak beautiful English, as you do. They're foreigners, they're Italians, they're French, they're this, they're that. And they think because they can speak really beautiful English that they can write in English. They can't. Because they don't hear what they don't know. And a translator has to hear what they know and don't know about this other language. You have to know where the flow, you have to know where the creaky wood is. You have to know where the hole in the floor is. You have to be able to render a foreign text into your own language. You can only translate into your own language as viscerally as you can. I really love doing it. But someone gave me a translation of a Ukrainian poem and done by AI. I said, no. This person said, AI is going to change. I said, no, AI is not going to change translation. Because translation is about humility. At every point, being aware of your own imperfections, what you're not hearing, tuning your senses to capture this, and being aware of imperfection. A machine is not aware of its imperfection. You can only approach the truth. You can't get there. You can only approach a perfect translation. A machine will never understand that. And that emotion that is invested by the translator in the work is something a machine can never have. And that translation illuminates, that emotion illuminates a translation. So he gave me this thing that he generated on AI, and I thought, this is terrible. But because English wasn't he was Ukrainian, but so he didn't see how bad the English was. Yeah. So it's, translation is very important now, especially for Ukrainian writers who need to be known. They will find, I think it's an opportune moment too, because people feel passionately about Ukraine, and people will want to bring this work forward.
Speaking about attempts to write in a foreign language, but everything which comes to my mind were Russian authors, like, for example, Brodsky or Nabokov, I guess. Does it read for you as something good, or it seems like something really weird?
Something to write in a foreign language? Nabokov, I think he was a terrible man. I think he's written some beautiful books. He's an awful person, and some of the books are I mean, I don't like Ada. There's lots of things I don't like about him, but there's some things that I really like. Those upper-class Russian, Middle European, Gregor von Retzory, they were all educated with French and German and English nannies. They never spoke Russian or German or whatever it was. They had no mother tongue in some ways. But they're sort of unicorns. It's very, and the same thing with Conrad. The Poles also. My Hungarian grandmother, who could read and write, but she wasn't an educated person, spoke 9 languages. So that was that sort of polyglot. That it's an identity that, or it's an experience that isn't really that available anymore. Isak Dinesen, the subject of my first biography, who wrote in English. She was Danish, but she lived in Kenya. She had nannies and tutors and English people, and they spoke English with, they had an English grandparent. So it was almost her language. And still, there's a seam, there's a couture, there's a seam where 2 languages have been tied together.
You are Jewish.
Yeah.
And you do not speak Hebrew, correct?
I don't. We went to Uman on the way to Odessa.
And that's what I wanted to ask you about Babi Yar and Uman, and overall perception of a Jew from New York, of what's going on.
Also Babel in Moldavanka.
Mm-hmm.
My father's family was Orthodox, but he sort of didn't want anything to do with it. My mother's family, the Hungarians, Hungarian Jews, they were people who lived through the Holocaust in America. They had come in the 19th century, but you couldn't not be aware of being a Jew. I was sort of raised as a Jew in New York, but my family didn't belong to a temple. We didn't celebrate Jewish holidays. I'm sort of a very secular Jew. And my son didn't have a bar mitzvah. I said to his father, if you want him to have a bar mitzvah, you have to join a temple, and I'll take him, and he didn't. But I took him to Yom Kippur services every year at the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. which is a beautiful place. And he said, Mom, why you don't believe what we I said, I'll tell you why. Because if you had grown up in Nazi Germany, they would have thrown you against an electrified barbed wire fence. That's why we're here. So, yes, and when I go to Babin Yar, and when we went to the forest, which is called something else Yar. What's the forest called? The Holodomor forest.
Биківня.
Yeah. And in both these places, speechless with horror. I think the memorial at Babin Yar is the stuff that was done recently with the peepholes and that unnecessary and kind of sensational. You don't need it. You just have to stand by the ravine. And the forest is very quiet and powerful. And of course, there's a long history of anti-Semitism here and in Poland and certainly in Russia and the Cossacks. And when I went to the museum, and there's the figure of Mamai sitting under the tree with his instrument, and his song is rising to the ears of God. And I'm thinking, yes, but he's a Cossack, so what else is he doing when he's not playing his music? So it occurs to me, all of this terrible destruction, this terrible murderous anti-Semitism. I feel it's not here now. On the contrary. But yes, it's something that's very overwhelming.
Ukraine. You described Odessa through the lights. You were describing students, for example, in the university. How else do you, how to say it correctly in English, how else do you digest, how else do you touch, how else do you feel Ukraine? Through what? Food, light? What? Tell me a bit more.
The language. I'm listening to it. I'm learning the alphabet. I'm trying to read the signs. I'm sounding them out to myself. So I'm in the position of a baby, of a 5-year-old going to school. And there's a book that says S-T-O-P. Stop. Mm-hmm. And I'm like that with all the signs. So there's this very young child learning this new language. And the faces, and the variety of faces. But people are so warm, and they're this like the soldier on the train. Thank you for coming. Thank you for I feel like a grateful one. Not I just got on a plane and took a train ride. No, I didn't do anything. I sort of love the smoking. It's terrible to say, but everybody smokes here, and I had to give it up. And it's a country undergoing a terrible trial, and you're gonna prevail. And I think Kyiv is beautiful. I think Odessa is a very beautiful city in a different way. I walk everywhere. See, I lose myself in the city. I get up, I go for a long walk. I've walked everywhere in this part of Kyiv, a bit in Podil, less, but just mostly all around this part of Kyiv. Walked all around Odessa. Just sort of, it's hard not being able to talk to people. Because I can in other places, I can sort of speak the language. I miss that. But going around with my Ukrainian friends has been great.
What is justice for you?
Justice?
Mm-hmm. Because being in the war situation, people speak about justice a lot. It's a really good question. It's really hard to answer, except that like truth, it's an ideal you can only approach. So again, it's like the humility of your imperfection, the humility of contradictions which can't be reconciled, the humility of two claims on something that have not equal maybe, but each has a point of view that has to be respected.
So I guess justice. Well, let's talk about Ukraine. 1,200 years of colonial oppression, right? That's a terrible injustice. And at various points in history, there have been attempts to redress it. They haven't worked. Or they've worked for a little while and then they haven't worked. And so this is a tremendous chance to fix something. And you just, I just feel myself hoping and praying that, because there's so many challenges also. After a victory, do you go back to the split society? Do you go back to competing claims? I guess justice is, in an ideal world, justice would be respecting the humanity of every single individual as equally valuable. And we don't live in that world. So, but I think that's the ideal of justice. That and it's an ideal.
Revenge. What is revenge?
Revenge? It has to be distinguished, revenge has to be distinguished from righting an injustice. Because revenge is a savage, very human, savage idea of inflicting on someone else punishment for what you perceive they have done to you. It's making someone suffer for something that they have done for you. It's payback. Revenge is payback. It's part of human nature to want it, but you know, it's part of human nature to want something terrible to happen to somebody who's hurt you. But it's a vicious cycle. You know, just where does it lead? It just leads to wars that go on for 1,000 years.
We had one evening, which was very old-fashioned, when we were sitting together with you and David and other people and discussing literature. And in that evening, I understood that all my, I mean, I sort of knew that, but I never realized it so sharply until that evening, that all the literature which, American or British, which I read since I was a kid, it's through the paradigm and perception through the choice of the translators and editors. So, because I do not see it as a whole, I do not see it holistically, I just see what was translated, what was chosen or allowed by that time to be translated. Right. So let's say there is somebody who is coming to you, of the students, or somebody like me as well, as a more older student, asking how to understand what is American literature, how to look at it, how to, because, you know, everything I saw was through the wardrobe with the books, which I had as a kid.
Wow, that is huge. American literature, well, you could look at it century by century. The early 19th century, you know, the great writers of the 19th century, the beginning of the great writers of the 20th century, the young literature now, what's happening now. I'd have to really sit down and think about a reading list. The students asked me that too, and I was suddenly shaken. I'm thinking, because I have been, in the last year, I've been reading old things. I haven't been reading new things. Or I've been reading things for work. And there's a Hungarian writer who writes in French, Agathon Christoph, who's
was translated into Russian, actually.
She, very interesting writer. I've been rereading Chekhov. Excuse me for saying this, but I have. I've in a period of depression. There's certain writers I turn to, and Chekhov is one. I've been reading Simone Weil, for a piece that was just published in the New Yorker. She's a French philosopher and mystic. I've been reading her, and Camus and various people who were close to her. So I haven't been reading the literature of the 21st century this year. And that's what I think young people would want to read. Not the classics. They're important, but the voices of their generation.
In the same conversation, both you and David were kind of more about poems. Poems are more important. So how do people divide into those who read more poems and those who read more prose, or what is the main difference between those?
Well,
to this?
Reading poetry and reading fiction, it's completely different. It's fiction, you sort of get swept away. Poetry roots you in the moment. It's a relationship to time that's very different. And you need you need to be able to put yourself in a very present place to really get the most out of poetry. You can open a novel and get into it, and then you look up and time has just gone by. So poetry is the maximum, great poetry is in a way, maximum abbreviation with the minimum loss of meaning. It's extraordinarily dense. It's extraordinarily distilled. There's nothing excess. There's nothing, I think it comes as close to being true as you can get, which isn't perfect. And it's a sort of spiritual, there's something about poetry that's, it's also extremely personal. It's extremely, David reads it, that's what he prefers to read when he's not reading about politics and war and current events and foreign policy. I read it, I do read it, and I go back to certain poets and poetry comes from, for me, comes from a place, it's written in a place of great solitude. And it has the power to breach my solitude.
Does scripts, the screenplays, or whatever is correct word in English, do they substitute somehow literature now or not?
No.
Not at all.
A screenplay is a plan for making a movie. It could be wonderfully written and clever and everything else like that. It's not meant to be read. It's meant to be acted. So no.
Coming back to women, who are the most impressive women, I don't know, last 50 years?
The most impressive?
3, 5.
Wow. We probably don't know who they are. Because you immediately start thinking of the famous people you could cite and this and that, and I think the most impressive people are often the ones who don't call any attention to themselves, with very sort of obvious heroic. I think the women who are fighting in Africa to end female genital mutilation, African women who are going against their culture, going against the patriarchy, going against this tremendous tradition to end this terrible harmful mutilation. I think they're among the most impressive women. I think women who are the women in India who are also fighting the rape and the women who are fighting women, you know, women in, there's privileged women, and there are billions of women all over the world living in terrible conditions of servitude and oppression. And I think the women who are fighting those situations, that's fighting that who are fighting to empower women to be autonomous, they're the most impressive women of the last period of time. Not politicians, not artists so much, sort of not pop stars. The women in the villages doing that work.
What is witnessing for you?
I feel I'm not doing it here because I'm not explicitly yet writing anything about Ukraine. But I'm here, I'm a rare foreigner who's here right now. And what it seems to me is I'm here to listen, to understand what's going on, because there's so much misconception. I can go back, not that I have any authority or know very much, but I know a little more than I did, and I know more than people know there. And I just to go back and say, no, you have this wrong. This is what they're doing. This is what this means to them. The Ukrainians and the Russians are not the same. It's not like, you know, there are these cliches. So just like you witness in a court, you try to tell the truth about something. You try to explain what you've seen in an accurate way, and what you've heard in an accurate way. And I mean, before I left, a doctor, a friend of mine who's Romanian, he was an old man, and he was born in Romania during the war, and he's Jewish. He said, oh, the Ukrainians are all anti-Semites, so this is worse than that, and Russian and Ukrainian, it's the same language, it's all crazy. So I'm going to go back and talk to him. I'm going to say, listen, you have these notions that are not true. And this is a country, I've now read the history, and this is a country that has been a colony of a sort of a very oppressed colony of Russia for a very, very long time, and they're fighting for their honor, fighting for their dignity. And yes, there's a lot of anti-Semitism. There's a lot of anti-Semitism everywhere. It's not there now.
Honesty. Do you feel that there is a lack of honesty overall? Because everybody is trying to be either nice or politically correct or pleasant. I don't mean Ukraine. I mean overall, you know, kind of discussions. Or it's not the case?
I don't know. Honesty, everybody lies. Everybody lies. Big lies, little lies, white lies, black lies. I think maybe if you can, like, try not to lie to yourself, but everybody lies to themselves too. So honesty is, again, talking about ideals. Justice is an ideal. Honesty is an ideal. Love is an ideal. Friendship is an ideal. We all fail. Translation is an ideal. So it's how persistent you are, how much pain you're willing to absorb to get as far as you can towards an ideal, because you're not going to get the whole way.
And the last thing I will ask you during this interview, I hope this part of the interview, because I hope you're coming back.
I'm coming back.
And we will have the series number 2. Read any poem which is important to you currently, which you are...
It would be Emily Dickinson, I think. It would be an Emily Dickinson poem. And I can't, I'm lucky I can remember how to follow the map to get to the studio, so I can't recite it for you. But it would be an Emily Dickinson poem. And it would be, Yeah. I'll send it to you.
Good. Thank you so much.
Дякую.
Дякую.